Luke Campbell was asleep one night when he heard his blinds rattling, but by the time he had woken up, a man had climbed through the window and pointed a barrel of a gun at his head. Ian Davies had grown up in a 3-bedroom house in Sheffield with his two parents, Alexander Young and Amelia Davies. Alexander and Amelia had a horrible alcohol addiction and would often stay up late drinking, playing loud music and having friends over extremely late at night, which meant for Ian that he would have many sleepless nights and would always be tired for school. He had to become very independent from a young age, as soon as 8 years old. He would have to find his own clothes, feed himself, and any other essentials he would do on his own. Of course, as Ian didn't have any parent figures, he would often steal food, clothes, or anything he could get his hands on. He would often get in trouble at school for stealing and getting in fights with other pupils. Ian got away with this throughout primary school. Once Ian had reached high school, he was 12 years old, and his home life just got worse and worse as him and his parents grew further apart. This also took a big toll on his school life, as he got expelled for his behaviour and the school couldn't deal with him no more. Furthermore, he would also have frequent arguments with his parents, which led to him getting kicked out of his house at only 15 years old, and was then sent to a foster home with his two carers, Lucy Carter and Beth Morgan. Lucy and Beth tried their absolute best to help out Ian, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Once Ian hit 18, he instantly moved as far away as possible and was living up north in a small town in Wick. This is when the robberies began to get more serious. The first victim was a man named Luke Campbell. He tends to work long shifts until late at night. The times he would often work would be 6 AM to 6 PM, 5 days a week. He needed to work a lot to keep a roof over his head, as he lived alone. So after he finished his shift on a late Friday night, he decided to cook himself dinner and put the TV on until he fell asleep. This was his usual Friday night routine. It was 8 to 7 PM. Luke was only 30 minutes into the show when he dozed off into a deep sleep. He was then woken shortly after by the sound of his blinds rattling behind his headboard. Assuming it was just the wind, turned to his side and attempted to fall asleep again. Before Luke even had the chance to shut his eyes, Ian hand came barreling through the window, tearing the blinds off the wall, nearly ripping his balaclava off. Luke, confused and terrified, laid in distress, trying to assess the situation and chaos happening around him. Prior to any of this, Luke had no time to process any emotion, and right when he went to take action, he had a barrel of a gun pointed at his head. Luke was observing the man dressed in black top to bottom. He had a long sleeve puffer jacket, dark denim jeans, leather trainers, with a black latex gloves to conceal his fingerprints. Right as Luke went to speak, he immediately got shut down when the robber aggressively demanded that he handed him any valuables in the house. Luke, hoping if he handed over all his valuables, Ian would just accept them and leave. Luke hesitantly began to tell Ian where his safe location was. Luke began to explain that the safe was hidden in the wardrobe behind all the clothes. Ian drags Luke out of his bed, pulling him by his t-shirt and pushing him into the safe, demanding he enters the code. Luke's hand trembles as he begins to enter the 6-digit code. The robber shouted at Luke to hurry up. As Ian's rage grew more and more, finally Luke cracked the safe open. A slight bit of relief filled Luke's body, hoping he would just leave, but it was far from over. Ian began to force Luke to put all the money and jewellery into the black bag Ian had in his hand. As soon as all the valuables were in the bag, Ian instantly blindfolded Luke, dragging him into the black hatchback car he had parked outside his house. He then proceeded to open the boot and force Luke in, and then slammed the boot behind him. All Luke could do is sit there as he heard the car turn over and move away from his house. Luke tried to listen to what direction he was going in, but it was no use. All he could do was hear the sound of other cars passing by. After an hour of driving, the car screeched to a stop. Luke then was dragged out of the car and thrown on the floor. All Luke knew was that he was on some sort of gravelly path as he felt it against the skin of his arms. Luke could smell wildflowers around him. He then heard the tyres of the car grind away on the gravel floor. He rushed to take his blindfold off to see the car, but had no number plate and was fully blacked out from the back. Luke then began to grasp the environment he was in. He was surrounded by endless fields of flowers and was stuck on the side of a gravelly country road. It was cold, as it was 9:37 p.m. Luke started by walking down the long twisty country roads. This started to feel like an endless task until Luke saw his last bit of hope. A lorry driver was driving towards him. He began to wave his arms to get the lorry driver's attention. The lorry driver slowly came to a halt and rolled down the window. Luke described the situation to the driver. He was shocked, as it was unusual for something like this to happen in this area. The driver felt empathetic and let Luke in his truck, as he was passing by the local town that Luke was from. The same day, he arrived back to his town and reported the incident. The police investigated his house, but there wasn't enough evidence on Ian, or the car he described, for them to do a search. However, the police patrolled the area for the next couple of weeks, but as Luke expected, nothing came of this. Mr. Davies enjoyed the thrill of the robberies and kidnapping, but it all became too risky, and he decided to take a more tactical approach on his second victim. The second victim, named James Harris, lived far away from any towns and was the perfect victim for Ian Davies. Ian tracked James for weeks before he was going to attempt the robbery, from who went in and out of his house to where he had worked. Knowing that James would leave work for 8 a.m. and would be back for 4 p.m, he waited outside until the clock hit 8:30 a.m. Ian also knew that James would always leave the second story windows wide open, so Ian set up his ladder outside the window and began to climb up. He lifted his leg over the window into the bedroom and crept into James's room. He quickly searched the room and found nothing. He headed downstairs in an attempt to find more treasures. Little did he know, James had a son called Marley, who lived in the attic and rarely left the house. Marley heard a strange sound rattling downstairs, and he knew his dad had previously left for work. He listened carefully for a few minutes before realising there was a stranger in his house. He slowly got out of bed and tiptoed towards his desk where his phone was located. He dialed 999 and asked the operator for the police. He whispered with his voice trembling, "There's someone in my house." The operator then asked his information before dispatching multiple police officers to his house. Ian had found numerous items of value, and after packing them into his duffel bag, Ian, excited with his new belongings, he sneaks out the front door. After approaching his car, tucked around the corner of the building, he was greeted by multiple police officers awaiting his arrival. Ian attempted to flee the scene on foot, but was immediately met by another officer around the corner who tased him in the chest before he hit the concrete. Ian was charged with robbery before being tied to Luke's case, where they found his belongings. He was then charged with armed robbery, kidnapping and assault. He was then sentenced to 25 years without parole. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my kind of content, please consider subscribing